Dr. Edlin, are you okay for me to begin? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our May 8th meeting of School District of Springfield Township Academic Affairs Committee. We have a very full agenda and lots of guests with us this evening. Because we want to bring you up to date on a lot of work that's been happening throughout the school year. I know at last week's board meeting, we mentioned to you everything we have in store for next year, but that does not at all take away from everything we've accomplished this year. So we have a lot to share with you. We are going to talk about our curriculum projects, technology innovation, integration, news and announcements. I just have some updates for you. And then certainly in the event there's public comment, we'll allow time for that at the conclusion of our meeting. If it's okay with everyone, we'll just get started. District curriculum work. One of the major components that comes out of the Office of Teaching and Learning, in which I work here, is making sure that we have a solid and robust plan for how we evaluate curriculum. And over the last 6 to 7 years, first under Dr. Yannicone's leadership in the role of assistant superintendent, and then to me, has really been making sure that we are very clear about our process, but also take our time to do our due diligence. And that curriculum revision isn't just selecting a resource, but instead really looking at a whole picture of how we're doing, talking about our current, figuring out where we want to go, and then walking out the steps of how to get there. So in Springfield Township, our goal is to really make sure that we're creating purposeful learning experiences that prepare our students for the future. I have come to learn in the last few months that that's not always involving key stakeholders. In our work here, it always involves administration, faculty, and students. Always. It doesn't matter if they're kindergarten students or they're seniors. We find ways to ensure student voice are a part of our curriculum review process. We have a four-step process, which has been informed by some major leaders in the field. Heidi Hayes-Jacobs, Bob Marzano, and Jay McTighe are three of the voices that have really built our process. And we have an articulated long document where I wrote a lot of words and have some graphics to help really organize our team so we have consistency regardless of the subject matter. So whether it's an ELA project, a science project, an art curriculum project, we follow the same process in order to make sure that we are yielding consistent work steps and get our fullest picture possible. Our first process is to review and study, then plan and develop, implement, monitor, and improve. In that first phase, which is what many folks have spent a lot of time since last summer working on, is really analyzing student performance. Where are we hitting it out of the park? What's really strong about our program as it is currently standing? And then on the other side of that, where are some areas where we think we could grow or our results are not quite hitting or landing where we had anticipated that they would? We have found a way from every student to give feedback to the project. We'll talk about what that looks like right now for K through 5 and ELA. And I know Dr. Markle and Dr. McLaurin will talk about that. At the high school and middle school last spring, we were able to gather a lot of feedback from students in the areas of English language arts and in science. We certainly need to go outside of our own Springfield Township bubble, which, we do enjoy our own perspective, but we want to make sure that we are aligned broadly and in a meaningful way with what's happening on the national landscape and on our local landscape. What's happening in terms of upcoming standards, which we'll talk about tonight. Are there particular frameworks or area of attention or research that we need to consider as we begin to think about how we're doing? Are we well aligned with the best practices as we know them to be? In each team, they've taken the time to really think about that. And then when they've done that, what are they recommending as our areas of focus? Where do we really need to put all of our time and effort? What is our sort of major initiatives and food for thought in our teams? And part of that is defining how will we know we've been successful? What does it look like to do our best work in something so that we're making sure we're keeping our eyes on the prize? Where do we want to go so that we have a roadmap laid out for us? And then really constructing a framework with the faculty, thinking about what's the student engagement and best practices going to look like in our curriculum areas. When that phase is completed, the staff and the departments have moved on to then drafting a vision statement or goal areas for their department. In doing that, they're reviewing state standards and coming to some consensus because, believe it or not, we don't all agree all the time. And so finding ways to really have personal, professional conversations around the ways in which we see all of this coming together and how we want to prioritize or what we want to do next. Pennsylvania standards are lengthy in every subject area, and sometimes to the point, there's a lot of head nods on the panelists, it's because they've read them. We can't focus on direct instruction of every single standard. That's not reasonable, nor is it the expectation. So instead, given our performance and where we're doing well, what are our priority standards and how are they bundling together to be reasonable components to help us move through the process? There are many standards that require direct explicit instruction. There are others that if you do something, the others will follow. And so we begin to take a look at those standards in each of these individual subject areas. We also want to really focus on that area of profile of a graduate. What are the skills, concepts, and content that are essential to happen in each of those individual courses? And what's the way in which we want that to be expressed in making sense out of our profile of a graduate? How are students becoming communicators? How are they developing their critical thinking skills? How are they recognizing their role as a global citizen within each individual course as we're revising and refining our curriculum? Then we come here to you at Academic Affairs to share with you sort of what our thinking is. And so I'm really pleased that we have 3 of our teacher leaders here this evening who are going to talk about that work in their departments. And then we're going to take a look at, after that, sort of where are we with the materials that we have to yield the results we're looking for? Are the materials that we have effective, efficient, contemporary? Do we need to revise them? Do we need to go find some different things? And so I know my colleagues this evening will speak to you about where we are with that. Once we've determined a need for core curriculum, this is something you'll remember from last spring. We did this same time last year. At that time, I had courses that I brought forward recommendations for new resources for us to adopt. This year, I don't have any of that recommendations yet, but likely we'll come back in the fall or the early spring to make those recommendations for the following school year. This summer and in the fall, we'll be focusing on instructional planning, using those key standards and skills and turning them into units of instructions for our teachers. We'll construct those major course assessments. How will we know how students are doing? Designing and implementing faculty professional learning. What do we need to boost our skills on in order to make this all come true? And then continue to refine and reflect on that vision statement and success criteria. Are we staying true to what we know we thought was important for students to achieve? Oops, whoa, sorry. Our final phase of that is reflecting on student artifacts. So at the end of the first year of rolling this out, then we will come back and say, okay, so now that we actually did it with real students in a real school, what did we learn? Was our pacing on point? Do we need to revise anything? Did we think we had made all the connections and resources we needed, or we find that actually we need to find a little bit more in a particular unit or not? And we make those revisions to our process. And by using this cyclical vision of moving through these 4 phases at any time for any project, I wanted to make sure that our members of our community and our board were aware that this is the process that goes on behind the scenes. And so while we don't bring every step of this along the way, this is what our school personnel are working on sort of behind the scenes in order to come in front of you and share any of their updates. Members of our committee, do you have any questions or clarification on our process that would be helpful right now? Dr. Edlin, good to keep going? Okay. So currently we have a number of projects that are underway. The biggest and heaviest lift this year, I think, was arguably in the English language arts. As it turned out, we focused primarily on grades 6 through 12 this year. And this spring began to bring on board elementary K-5. So we'll talk about that. I also have with us one of our members of our science department at the high school to talk about where we are with science broadly, but specifically in biology and environmental science. I'm going to talk with you along with Dr. McLaurin and Dr. Markle about our approach to K-5 health. And then Mr. Fuller and I will have a conversation briefly at the end around middle school world languages and some rethinking on our part based on some student and family feedback. Okay. Mrs. McCaslin and Dr. Rittenhouse are up first. I'm going to ask them to sort of take the lead in sharing with you our project in high school ELA. Mrs. McCaslin, Dr. Ritt, I turn it over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so it's your bonus tonight. I won't be talking that much. So just and you'll hear this from both Jen and from Megan, but one of the things that we really look at is the profile of a graduate when we're looking at the course. I'm proud to say the departments developed mission statements for each department, looking at state and national standards. Student voice is very critical, as we hear what kids have to say in surveys and just interviewing them. And then finally, our expert teachers, meaning they have done it. They're the ones in the classroom, they're writing it. So I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about high school ELA 9 through 12. Thanks, Jen.
All right. So thank you, everybody. I'll try to be brief and mindful of time. Essentially, as you know, as Damien stated, we've been working through the curriculum writing process. We're really just completed phase 2, and then we're approaching phase 3. What that means is that we did work through the fall to gather a lot of data from students' voices themselves, test scores, performance measures, etc. We also worked across different professional development with reading, book talks, even visiting other schools to think about what does instruction look like in the language arts high school classroom, and also what is the relevance of the language arts education to high school students, not just in high school, but also what it would mean for them once they finish high school. From there, we came to an understanding and began to bring the seeds of our vision statement together in some areas that we decided that would be essential to what we were looking at were authentic learning, student choice, student-centered classrooms, values around diversity, equity, and inclusion, also considering the adolescent brain development and what does that mean in terms of literacy, and then also understanding and values on different methods for close reading and writing, as well as studying grammar and vocabulary. But the final thing that we also wanted to really make sure that comes across is this maintaining sort of the awe and wonder of storytelling, that we all remember like why we engage with storytelling, whether we read, watch movies, listen to podcasts, whatever it is that we do. How do we engage with that and find meaning in that and enjoyment in the classroom? And then for our time, once we graduate, what does that mean? So from there, that really informed our vision statement. And you can see if you click on it there, there were some words.
Do you want me to hit the ELA department link or the vision statement? I'm sorry.
If you hit the high school ELA link, that'll show you.
Can everyone see that?
So the vision statement really embodies and captures all of these values in a very succinct way. Some things that we chose to emphasize were thinking about students as critical and creative thinkers. This idea of student choice and agency. And again, the value of enthusiasm for reading and understanding the power of language, and also maintaining that curiosity and appreciation for storytelling. And that really took us technically to the next step, but we ended up inserting one more step in there after collaborating and talking, and that's that link, ELA Department Overview document. And so this one was after having so many wonderful conversations and dialogues with my peers, and also doing some individual thinking and continuing those discussions, we started to think about like, where is a holding place for all of this information where we could begin to gather it. So we created this document, which I'll show my age. Sometimes I call it my Jerry Maguire memo. But we created this document really working together of where we would articulate our values, as well as create clear skill and process sequences in the reading, writing, and discussion areas, and group them together by 9, 10, and 11, 12, and then align that with the state standards. And the reason why, there's many reasons why we wanted to have this document, but part of curriculum writing is a little bit of conquer and divide. And when you do that, you still have to have some uniform agreements about what you think is valuable and essential to include and how you're constructing that. If you want that time to work to be done thoughtfully and creatively. So we created this document that would hold those things. It's fairly lengthy, but when you scroll it, you can begin to see, like on the second page, there's the spell out of all those values that I just mentioned that came from our research and dialogue and discussion in the fall. You go even further, what you start to see these reading, writing, and discussion sequences for the courses, as well as like on this page, what are the core course elements? What do we want every course to have in it? And how is that reflective of the values that we articulated? What are the types of things that we're considering in text or storytelling forms that we would study? So this really created a platform for us to then develop those forward-facing docs, which are up for approval this evening. And within that, you can see that we have descriptions of the courses. We have the essential questions, as well as using the profile of the graduate to draw out and be very clear about our scope and sequence with critical thinking, as well as other important elements. And with that, those forward-facing documents really also give us a view into how we're designing the courses. But then it also helps us to think about, with the profile of a graduate, how we fit into the greater language arts K through 12 sequence, and then how we even fit into the greater K through 12 school district sequence. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Our next steps are really then to go forward with unit plans, which we have the essential questions for. We have some structures that we're beginning to draft out, and then work collaboratively to pilot ideas, evaluate processes, and use data to refine our thinking and approach to the work, as well as possible materials, or look at materials that we think would be relevant and instructive for students and support student learning. So that's, I don't know if I made it in my time frame. That's it. I think that takes it all together. Questions or clarifications, because that was a lot of information.
Board members? Questions, comments, reactions to Mrs. McCaslin and her team?
No, I think this is very thorough. And as a graphic designer, I appreciate how clean and professional this looks too. I love the icons, but yeah, so I don't have any questions specifically, but I do feel that it's very well thought out and very thorough.
I would have to concur with that. And I love the graph. It's easy to read and to be able to see from one step to the next. So very thorough, very detailed. And I applaud all the work that's gone into this. Thank you so much. I will be sure my peers in the language arts department, they will be really appreciative to hear that. They have really extended themselves and pushed ourselves to think beyond just to just go further with every step. So thank you so much.
Mrs. McCaslin, you and your team did a great job.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, Jen. No, if there's no other questions for Mrs. McCaslin or Dr. Rittenhouse on the high school project, our other equally substantive work was done at the middle school this year in grades 6 through 8, which also required all of the same work as we talked about in phases 1 and 2. And to speak to that with specificity and examples is Mr. Zach Fuller and Mrs. Natalie Lane.
Hi, everybody. So from my perspective, right, Natalie and the English department, and along with the instructional coaches, have really been driving this process forward. But I have just a couple of things to say about it. You know, from previous talks we've had about the ELA curriculum in the middle school, we know that a lot of what we do here is try to build out students' voice and students' confidence in using their voice within what we have called up until now, up till this curriculum revision, our writing-based curriculum. And so we do a lot of like working with mentor texts and getting students to analyze those and then use some of the skills that they've learned from that analysis in order to influence their own writing. One of the things we wanted to be mindful of in this revision is that while we're doing that, we're also supporting students' access to content standards, which our team has done a great job of building that into the new curriculum documents. And we also have done a lot of work at the middle school this year, building backwards from the high school profile of a graduate goals, and thinking about what that means for us as a school. And one of the things I like about the forward-facing documents, I think that you're about to see, is that they are also aligned with those profile of a graduate back-mapped middle school exit outcomes. And so I think there's some real clarity here. I know that we're also in pursuit of a resource. I've been sitting in on those meetings, but I'll let Natalie speak to all those specifics. So thanks, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you again. Isha, a former student, and Dr. Etwin, my professor. So it's nice to see you. I don't want to be too redundant to what Jen has already said so well, Jen. So thank you. I'm incredibly embarrassed to have to go after you. But yes, the middle school has also been working through the curriculum review. One of the biggest challenges that the middle school has is that we're a bridge. It's a very unique place to be, specifically as a student and as a learner. We are working upwards from what the elementary school already builds, and we are also looking backwards to what the high school needs. Previously, we were working from this writing-based curriculum standpoint where we were looking at mentor texts and then analyzing them, and we don't necessarily want to lose the strengths of that program. What we're really looking to do is diversify our toolkit as teachers and what we can offer the students and how we can prepare them better for the high school. Specifically, what we've been trying to do is create writing that's meaningful for them, but also preparing them for the real world, focusing on the power of language. But as I said, middle school is unique. A lot of our lessons and a lot of our writing and a lot of our focus is on them developing, identity, who they are, how they fit into a community, how they belong. And a lot of our texts and a lot of our resources follow that same vein. So far, we've been looking at a few resources. We're still considering whether or not that's something that we want to implement. We've been really examining and zooming in on some of our current units to see what works and what we can update and fix and connect to better support the high school. And so far, that's pretty much where we are. Damien, anything?
I think the part that was really important for your team is you spend a lot of time looking at current performance data and where we have real strengths, and then really thinking about how as a team, 6, 7, and 8, we're building that capacity. And that sounds like not a big deal, except it's a really big deal because 6th graders aren't only worrying about ELA and reading. They're adjusting to life as middle schoolers, which is not the life as an elementary student. And so I think what you all were really, correct me if I'm wrong, this is sort of what my take from what you've shared with me in the work has really been like, who are these humans that we have access to 80 minutes a day? But how are we recognizing their growing worldview and their sense of autonomy and independence?
Absolutely.
Continuing to learn to read, while continuing to learn to be a writer, while expressing their thoughts and ideas, and then supporting those thoughts and ideas. Like I don't mean to make that so evident, but like those are gigantic. They sound small, right? But they are gigantic chunks of time to help students who are at real diverse levels. In fact, I was just at the middle school again today and saw a 7th grader who I swore was like in 2nd or 3rd grade because they're just so little. And then these other giants who are walking through their brains and bodies are just in all different places. So I thought your team worked really hard to talk through all of that, sort of the landscape of middle school and ELA learning, which crosses lots of different teachers and lots of different expectations in the different content areas. So I don't know if you want to say more about that, but I do think that took so much of your work is to really come to consensus around this idea of what's the point of ELA in the landscape of middle school.
Right. I mean, I definitely think that's true. When you speak to 6th grade teachers and when you speak to 8th grade teachers, it's like sometimes we're living on a different planet. And then if you go down to the different floors of the building, Zach can attest that it's like being on a different planet sometimes in the grade that you're used to teaching. We did review a lot of the student data, and we do just have anecdotal conversations a lot with the students. There's some things that we're teaching that maturity level for some kids are not there, right? So this idea of differentiating and scaffolding at the middle level is really important. So it's important for us that we have a variety of texts and ways for them to show that they're learning and that they're growing as a student. for some kids, it's important that they can learn how to express themselves. Some kids already feel comfortable by doing that, right? Some kids feel comfortable doing that and can connect themselves to an author. Some kids aren't there yet. So we kind of try to look from 6th, 7th, and 8th to create this vertical alignment, right? If 6th grade specifically focuses on who am I, right? And then how can I connect myself to a community? 7th grade builds upon that with this idea of identity. And we look at a lot about social identity through first person narrative and through different novels and pieces of poetry. They write a play in 7th grade. And furthermore, in 8th grade, seeks to further that idea by taking this idea of individualism and how that in itself, being yourself, can be an act of rebellion. So we really have been focusing on these larger themes and how to connect them to the students and how to make ELA more than just grammar and reading. And, we want them to have a robust independent reading program. We want them to be able to write about themselves. We want them to be able to make connections. We want them to also be prepared and ready for the real world. So thank you, Damien, for the piggyback.
Absolutely. I think that's why I think it's so important to have brought this whole process forward, because and each of you on your team, just much like at the high school, have your own ideas and perspectives informed from your own experience, your teaching locations, your own identities. And I think bringing all of that together really was coming out of COVID and a pandemic, right, has taken a lot of time to really come back to the table of what do we believe and what are we trying to achieve? And I think it's been really powerful work that is tightening us up. But I think at the middle level in particular, as I'm sure Mr. Fuller will allude to, really these things aren't happening in isolation from social studies, for example. And what are the ways over time, once we make our decisions in ELA, how do we then map in what's happening in other content areas so that students are experiencing those connections in purposeful and meaningful ways?
Right. And that's why I'm so happy with the work that the team has been doing around the profile of a graduate too, because we've been talking about these and the English department in particular, and in particular, Natalie, have been very involved in the conversations around profile of a graduate and transfer goals across curriculum. And that's extremely valuable work for a middle school because it lends itself to interdisciplinary work. And that's what middle school is all about. So.
Members of our school board, do you have any questions or comment for Mrs. Lane or Mr. Fuller on the middle school project?
Damien, I just wanted to say how impressed I am by the thoughtfulness that I think went into this, and to look at where the kids are emotionally at that age. As a counselor and particularly working with middle school, I just am very impressed by the thought process that went into creating this. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Amy. They did a wonderful job.
Yes, I would have to say the same. And Amy, you stole my thunder. I too really like the idea of focusing on the young people where they are. They're all coming to middle school from various perspective and life experiences. And I really liked how that was incorporated. Greatly done.
They did a fantastic job.
I appreciate you thinking through how this is foundational and then thinking through how it can be connected throughout the rest of the courses, like social studies, because I do think that that's really great to, reinforce everything as you can moving through all the different subjects.
And I think that's as we talked about it in this committee several months ago, right? Like as we rethink middle school learning, an opportunity to really look at interdisciplinary making connections and the ways in which these things don't happen in isolation, which as adults, we try to continue to figure out. But I think middle learners are uniquely situated to think about that, and for us to help them make those connections directly and explicitly, and not assuming that they are making that connection. So. Thank you, Mrs. Lane. Thank you, Mr. Fuller. I really appreciate it. Great work. You all are welcome to stay. I am going to talk about the most fascinating structured literacy for a minute before I allow Dr. McLaurin and Dr. Markle to speak. So making sure you're up to date on your structured literacy. As I know our members of our school board are well aware, because we've talked about it before, Pennsylvania in Act 55 decided to articulate their expectations around structured literacy. Structured literacy in many landscapes is identified as the science of reading. right? That's what you'll hear people talk about. This science of reading is not new. It's actually old. It's just a matter of us articulating the exact pieces and making sure that we're providing our due diligence. So Pennsylvania has issued expectations that begin in the fall, actually began this year, to begin doing work around structured literacy for lots of staff. Which I'll talk about in a second. But when we talk about structured literacy, it's the major strands of reading, right? That you can't do language comprehension and reading comprehension without having the basic building blocks. You have to understand that sounds make words, words make phrases, phrases make sentences, and sentences make paragraphs. And when you understand how those pieces come together, you are then able to comprehend. Comprehension can't happen before you can decode. Right? You have to decode first. You have to make sense out of the words. And so this is work, this rope is like everywhere right now, but it's been around since 2001. I left that on there with the year because I think it's really important that this is not some like brand new phase. This has been around a long time. I think some educators have moved away from it, and more importantly, publishing houses moved away from the basics and went to more bells and whistles and sparkly things. And now sort of Pennsylvania is requiring that we really land on K through 8 in particular, but K through 12, thinking about what's the way in which we're building language comprehension through the building blocks over time. And I just share that because I think it would be inappropriate to have this conversation about ELA curriculum revision without making sure you knew that we know that we have requirements under Pennsylvania's new expectations to provide in-servicing and learning. And the surprise that PDE provided earlier this year was whether or not someone was using a certificate that they have in particular areas. It doesn't matter if you possess a certificate as listed on this list. So if you have an early childhood or an elementary certificate, even if you're not teaching on that certificate, you must participate in structured literacy training. So our obligation as a district is to identify all those who are required, even if they're not using that certificate right now. Does that make sense? And so this is a huge part. We have not missed this for a second. Dr. Markle and I love a good training session on leadership and science of reading and structured literacy. We've been hanging out with our job-alike colleagues all around the county and around the state, participating in ongoing learning. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew we know that. Because otherwise I don't know how you would know that because we hadn't talked about it, but it is a major driving force of the work that we're doing. And I'll remind this group that this time last year, Dr. Markle and I were here recommending and adopting the GEODS materials, which we talked about as decodable text that we would use at K1 and 2 this year to align to our foundation's work, which was using phonics and phonemic awareness and using real print and real books to decode and practice their decoding skills with the skills that we had instructed. So I'm going to remind you, we're finishing up our first year of that resource, which was again to the same point. We were just a year ahead in that resource adoption. Questions on structured literacy and Pennsylvania's requirements? Okay. I always like to make it interesting. Let me just shove in some information for everybody. That said, Dr. Markle, Dr. McLaurin, and I have had a good time this spring working on our introduction to K-5 ELA and getting this project started. And so I'm going to ask them to talk about how we got some faculty input, student input, and where we are with building our success criteria. Either one of you want to start? Did you rock, paper, scissors this ahead of time by any chance?
We sure did not, but I don't mind jumping in and then we can tag team Dr. Markle just because both of our buildings are following a similar process. One of the things that we've been able to really focus in on is trying to make sure that we have multiple voices and perspectives as we take a look at our ELA curriculum review process. And that's been led by Dr. Johnson and her vision for making sure that we incorporate as many voices as possible. And so Dr. Markle and I spent time planning and brainstorming what were the best ways to engage all of our staff. In the past, we would have a small group of teachers come together and help inform the process. But before we begin, bring in a smaller group, we wanted to make sure that we got the voices of all of our staff and give them an opportunity to provide feedback. So we spent time with our grade level teams focusing in on our best days of reading and our best days of writing. What does instruction look like? And we tried to develop some success criteria. And each of our teams worked together to drop ideas of what they thought, their best reading and writing instruction looked like, where students were experiencing success. It was nice for the team to share all their ideas and find some things that they had in common, and to eventually be able to narrow their focus and to develop a few success criteria statements. And as teams, we've worked to narrow those statements down to identify just one for each building. As you can imagine, we have pretty big teams. I know Enfield has teams of teachers that have 10. We have teams of 9 and 8. And we were able to successfully incorporate ways to have all the voices of our team members involved in this process. And then we were able to get all those statements completed by each grade level team. And then the next steps would consist of allowing our entire faculty to take a look at what are our success criteria statements to provide us with additional feedback. And so it's been a really cool and unique way to engage and get our staff involved in this process. And we're excited because every faculty member has had the opportunity to give feedback on our best days of reading, on our best days of writing. What does instruction look like where kids are experiencing success? And it's been great to use that as a launch pad into really looking more closely at what curriculum resources might match our particular needs in terms of how we have identified success criteria. Is there anything else you want to add on to that, Dr. Markle?
No, I think the main thing is, and it's actually really cool to see what the high school and the middle school have done, because I can see that that's where our work is going. And so this has been a really neat step, as Dr. McLaurin shared, just gathering our teachers they're the experts, and they're the ones, teaching and sharing, and they know, what is best for our students. So it was a nice way to also empower them of like, let's think about this. What does our best reading and writing look like? And so that was a really nice step that we did with our faculty, but then we took it another step further with our students. And that was where it was really fun, because as you know, elementary students, they have a lot to say, believe it or not, even our little kindergartners. And so at each building, the principals and the assistant principals had a chance to meet with some representatives from each grade level. And so we asked the same, very similar questions that we did with the teachers. Like, when you think about reading, right, what do you love about it? How do you learn best with when we're learning how to read or write? And the answers that they gave us are just so genuine, but very, very helpful. I know, even at our kindergarten, first and second grade level, we talked about writing. We talked about what kinds of things they do when they don't know how to spell a word, right? What's helpful for that, but also what do they like to write about? Do they have enough time to write about things that they just want to write about? Or is it only spent on time where there's more of a topic? And so it just sparked a lot of great information. And so similar with what we're sharing with the staff, we're going to be sharing the feedback from the students, and both the faculty input and the student input is helping us to get towards this. What's our vision? What do we believe at the elementary level for literacy? And so it's been a really, really cool process. We're looking forward to continuing that. I'm just trying to think anything else off of that, Dr. McLaurin or Dr. Johnston.
I did want to share too, I think what was really unique about the process through the student voices and the staff voices, you heard so many commonalities of things that our district places a priority on. Our profile of a graduate, our equity work, and also our UDL work as well, in terms of trying to create access and opportunities in equity in terms of, equitable access for our students. You heard a lot of those things happen as the teachers and the students necessarily didn't use those words, but they expressed it through what they described in terms of what was really good on their best days of reading and writing. But the staff were able to make those connections. And it was really nice to see that they really do believe in the areas that we're focusing our efforts in, and it came out in their statements as they developed them. So our next steps really are being able to take these vision statements to really think about, as we begin to formalize a team, how can we use these statements to inform our work in terms of looking at particular curriculum resources that we might consider implementing, or at least starting to think about using to continue to support our students in the learning of reading and writing?
One of the other things that I would just identify that's so different between the secondary project and that primary project is K-5 teachers, all of them have a responsibility for direct instruction in reading and writing, every single one. Everyone comes in contact with a student and needs to be part of our reading and writing decisions, which, while that's there are reading and writing skills embedded into every 6 through 12 classroom. The responsibility for English language arts instruction lands on the lap of our English language arts department. And so you're talking about coordinating 10 people or 15 people versus 50 and 60 people. And so trying to how we're doing this project is just a little different because we have to have everyone's voice because there's too many people involved. And what we heard from our faculty going into this process was 7 years ago when we had done this process last, there was a sense that some voices were not heard, didn't have the opportunity to weigh in until we were pretty far down the path. So we really wanted to be mindful of that throughout our planning. Folks, would you agree that that was important to us, that we making sure we kept that at the forefront?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Board members, any questions or comments for Dr. McLaurin or Dr. Markle on our K-5 project?
I really like how the team really focused on all of the voices to really get a basis for where we are and where we need to go. So I really applaud the team for, making this a priority to get all of the input.
Thanks, Dr. Etlin. Great. Not to be outdone was the science department. And as this committee is well aware, Pennsylvania Department of Ed threw me for a little loop over the summer when they did in fact finally release standards we've been waiting for a very long time. And so that really put a, Dr. Scragan, would you agree, hiccup into our roadmap and planning, because in every time we would make a decision, PDE would run out a new resource or a new idea that sort of impacts the planning that we had.
That would be correct.
In spite of the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, our high school science team was really motivated to take a look at their student achievement and performance and take a look at creating a vision statement. So Dr. Scragan, Dr. Rittenhouse, and Mrs. Marchetti, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about your vision statement and our course designs for bio and environmental science.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I will speak first to the vision statement. I think Dr. Rittenhouse is going to try to save his voice for a little bit. The vision statement by the department is really one that produces a whole learner, somebody who can change the world with the application of their knowledge. It's not just let's teach science as a bunch of facts and let's not have students just do labs that are cookbook. It's more than that. It's hands-on, it's inquiry-based, real world applications, collaborations with their peers, all the things that you find in our profile of a graduate, which I think is really, really good. And I think one thing that I just want to highlight, I think is just really, really cool, is the last idea, that ignite the flame of curiosity. And I think, somehow that gets lost through the transition by the time they get to high school. So we want to make sure that we keep on igniting that passion in our students to learn science the way that we hope that they could then take that information and move forward with their lives, whether they be in college or in a business or, if they find themselves just, in their car, how to make solve these problems. So that's what the department was all about. And we are slowly looking at the new standards that the Pennsylvania Department of Education has released. It's the first time in 20 years that they've updated the standards. And I hate to say I had much more hair when they had the first set of standards back then, but the department is hard at work trying to update their curriculum. So I'm going to pass that off now to Miss Marchetti.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan. I teach science up at the high school, but we have, so kind of off of what, based off of our vision statement, our main goal as a whole department was to get our students gaining skills that would help them in all of their diverse career choices in their future, because we know not all students are going to go on and work in labs one day, but all of our students can learn the skills that they need that fit that profile of a graduate, like communication and critical thinking and things like that they will use every day. So that was our goal as a department. And in order to start, we wanted to focus on gathering a bunch of data. So we administered last spring, or like right before school let out, a survey that our students could fill out. And that survey focused on them telling us their own skills evaluations of what skills do they feel that they've gained from our, and what was their interpretation of the effectiveness of our program. And so from those things, we were able to determine some specific areas of need that we felt like maybe a certain percentage of our students were choosing that they did not feel adequate in creative problem solving, or a lot of our students were feeling a little bit not as adequate in classroom discussion and presentations and presenting orally to the group, which is a huge skill that you'll use in any field that they would go into. So we collected data from that survey, and then we also looked at our final exam grades across all of the courses. And then specific to biology, we looked at the Keystone data and where our students' strengths and where are they, where are their weaknesses in terms of getting questions correct on the Keystone. And we also could use Keystone data, some of the Keystone data for the environmental science course as well, because there is a pretty large overlap there with some of the units. So we looked at all of this information. We started this last summer, and then we also met Wednesdays during our department time. And then we were able to develop the most crucial skills that our students would need that can then connect back to the profile of a graduate. So this is our biology one. And we could then use our standards and use our overall essential questions to pinpoint specific focus skills that would then meet the profile of a graduate. So we felt that if we were meeting the profile of the graduate, even though these are biology, like they're definitely geared towards biology, these skills, but we have those skills that they would learn with biology, they could apply to anything in their life one day, which was one of our main goals. And so this is our biology one. And then we also did the same thing for the environmental science one, and the other department, or the other subjects are also working on phase 2. They're just not quite finished with that yet. So our next steps then, after this would be approved, would be to then craft our specific units of study. And we have our essential questions for that. And we have the focus skills that we want our students to gain from each unit. So when we start phase 3 and putting together each unit, we want to focus on what lessons can we design that would be inclusive and allow for all of our students to gain those specific focus skills that we have determined ahead of time. And then hopefully we'll be ready to start implementing that. I don't know if anybody have any questions for me.
Thanks, Mrs. Marchetti. Team, any questions from our board members for our high school science team?
Dr. J, if I could mention too, Megan Marchetti is our new science coordinator at the high school, and we appreciate her leadership. Laura Musetti did a great job doing it for several years. Some guy named Scott Scragan did it before her. I don't know what's become of him, but we've had great leadership in that department, and I'm sure Megan will continue. She's hit the ground running, and I appreciate her work and leadership with this. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do that.
We're really glad you could be with us this evening. Any comments or reactions? Great. You're getting a good job, Mrs. Marchetti. I think you're all set. You're welcome to stay with us, but I also understand you might have other things to do with your evenings, because we're going to start talking about K-5 health.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for being here, Megan. I appreciate it. All right. So not to be outdone, Health and PE equally is concerned that the last time there were new standards released for their work was in 2002. As we may know, the world is a different place. And so there are new national standards specifically for health and PE. We're going to focus on the health standards. I think this committee is well aware that we have wrestled back and forth with the ways in which to address elementary health. Under the old standards, social emotional learning really was a primary way for us to get to those health standards, along with integrating some key ideas in the PE or health class. However, moving forward, the new health standards are much more substantive, as you can see here. And our team really feels like in order to make sure our young people are as healthy and well in all parts of their life, we have to start earlier. And so in combination with Dr. Markle and Dr. McLaurin, our first interim step is to spend some time this summer really digging into these standards and focusing on the ways in which they are expressed. It is different to have pre-K to grade 2 standards and grades 3 to 5 health standards. That is new in 8 different areas, which we've tried to articulate here on that clickable link for you all. And then our plan is this summer to rough that out, put an interim plan into next year, and then decide sort of this time, sort of make some decisions about what's our best way to move forward as we think about 24-25 in implementing these along with the new PE standards. So our health team and PE team has been really trying to think about how to make sure that we are not only just focusing on academic success for our students, but life wellness as that pertains to the profile of a graduate, that if students are not developing active and healthy habits outside of school beyond their health and PE classes, we're not really doing, the rest of this may not matter. So we need to balance both their academic success as they transition to life after high school, but also their physical well-being and mental well-being. And so Dr. Markle or Dr. McLaurin, anything else to say about elementary health?
No, I think the one thing just to add is as we begin looking at this as a team, we're also in the summer as a part of our work is really trying to take a closer look at where these standards might apply across the K-2 and 3 to 5 spectrum. And so we're excited to work with the team to look and kind of work backwards in terms of what these standards are and what they might look like by the end of 5th grade, what they might look like in 4th grade and 3rd grade, and really trying to be strategic as to where's the best place to provide students with access to these standards and opportunities to learn them in really creative ways. And so we're excited because while this is new, I think it's also another opportunity for us to be innovative and find some creative ways to provide exposure to our students to these standards.
And to be clear, Pennsylvania is working to review and implement these standards. I am sure they will do their own PDE version of this, but it's our belief that the national standards will guide that work. And so we believe that it's in the best interest of our students to go ahead and just jump in and begin working through this, knowing that when Pennsylvania's comes out, there may be some reformatting or something we need to adjust, but roughly we'll have a plan in place that should be substantive enough. That would work for Pennsylvania also. Dr. Markle, you were going to say something? I apologize.
No, I think you both covered it very nicely.
Excellent. Any questions or comments on health? No. Excellent. And again, not to be outdone, Mr. Fuller is going to have the last word on some exciting reflection on world language learning at the middle level.
Yeah, so
Mr. Fuller.
So you'll remember that 2 years ago, we thought about bringing Spanish more broadly into the middle school curriculum. We had 8th grade was the first time that students were encountering a world language at all at that time. And we thought it was important to bring students an introduction to especially the Spanish language earlier because of the composition of our community and our world and our country. And so we wanted to introduce them to Spanish earlier. We decided at that time that we wanted every student at the middle school to complete Spanish 1 over 2 years, 6th and 7th grade, and then be prepared for Spanish 2 by the time they got to 8th grade. And as we do with all things, we pursued that plan and collected a lot of feedback from our students and from our families. And part of what we were hearing is that the amount of work that it takes to do that in the time period that we had, which was less than a full year of instruction, was really, really rigorous, probably too rigorous for 6th and 7th graders. And so we thought about how can we keep what we liked about that and also return to a model that brought the rigor of a level 1 Spanish study back to 8th grade. And so Dr. Johnson and I had some conversations with the teacher of the course and with our parents and our students. And we're right now pursuing a plan to introduce students to an exploratory Spanish class in 6th grade as a quarterly special. So the intention would not be to prepare students for academic level 1 Spanish instruction, but to give them what we set out to give them, which was an introduction to the Spanish language and culture. And then to take a broader look at world languages in 7th grade in an exploratory, fun way. And then allow students to choose Spanish 1 as they have in the past in our district, along with either German 1 or French 1 in pursuit of further study. One of the challenges that we faced in putting that program together is that, of course, we have students in the pipeline who are targeted to reach Spanish 2 in 8th grade. And so one of the things that we had to consider with that was creating a pathway for students who had already completed the requisite coursework and wanted to continue their studies, which I think we've done really well. So Dr. Johnston, did you have anything you wanted to add or anything I didn't say? No? Oh, hold on.
I couldn't find my unmute button. Mr. Fuller, I think you captured it. I just wanted our board to be aware that we are making some shifts to the 6th grade sequence in hopes that we can find a just right balance to give our students that worldview that they need and an understanding of language learning. But given their developmental milestones happening in the 6th grade, I think we may have overshot that target by 1 additional piece. And so I think we want to just dial it down a little bit and regroup so that we keep that love of language learning and it's not overwhelming to them.
Agreed.
Thanks very much, Mr. Fuller. Any questions or comments on world language learning? Excellent. And for the last word on technology this evening from Erdenheim, Dr. McLaurin, do you want to talk about your new Chromebooks?
Sure, certainly. So we're in the part of the district process where we get the opportunity to get updated new Chromebooks. And so we spent a lot of time talking about what would be the best for our students to be able to continue to grow and be innovative in their learning. And so the Chromebooks that we'll be bringing to Erdenheim will be touchscreen Chromebooks where the students will be able to interact with the Chromebooks and also with the stylus that they can use to be able to write. We felt like this will be beneficial because our students, when they're working with woodworking, a lot of times we use mini white slates. If you visit our school, the kids might hold up their answers or they might mark up their words. And so having a tool like this that will allow that to happen and allow our students to interact with it more frequently, we felt like would be really beneficial for our students. And so we're excited because obviously this is also a nice transition for our students from infield who uses iPads. So it helps kind of be a nice transition for our students who are using the iPads that are touchscreen and they can kind of zoom in and zoom out to a Chromebook device that's you can zoom out and use a stylus on. It still has some compatible features. While different, there are some similarities that we think are beneficial for our students, but academically, we're excited about the endless possibilities that it can provide for our students in the area of English language arts, math, and science, as well as social studies.
Thanks, Dr. McLaurin. Any questions or comments on that?
Dr. Johnson, if you don't mind, I'll just interject. For our board members, there will be a motion on the table on Monday night for the adoption of these Chromebooks. And that will include exactly as Dr. McLaurin has described, approximately 620 touchscreen devices. So you'll see that as an agenda item for board approval.
Thanks, Dr. Yannico.
Yep.
Much of the other thing we wanted to just mention to you is really just informational, is that you can't turn on a TV or a news feed or a magazine article or frankly, your social media followings, and not have something on there representing the idea of the ways in which artificial intelligence is impacting and infiltrating, in some people's words, all components of our lives, whether it's an update to the Microsoft operating system, whether it's ChatGPT, or whether it's other functions of writing speeches. I think there's ways in which we're hearing about artificial intelligence coming. And so I just wanted the members of our Board of School Directors and our community to be well aware that we are talking about that inside. Our administrators participated in a conversation and an initial orientation to sort of what's happening out in the world. We've brought that back to our buildings. We've had faculty members as a part of their own individualized professional learning, participating in webinars and trainings on ways in which we can use artificial intelligence to enhance our instruction in the classroom. For many, it takes the opportunity to have students create a draft of work and then enhance that work on their own. So I think we're trying to purposefully help guide our students to ways in which to responsibly and ethically use artificial intelligence, not without some challenges. And certainly we're not in a position to say, here's what we're doing yet. We're at the early exploratory phases. Dr. Yannicone, does that feel like adjust sort of what we were hoping to share this evening?
Yes, Dr. Johnson and I have been talking about AI for several months now. Just wanted to make sure the board was aware that it is on the radar, and we are keeping close eye on things as information comes out. And if you have any questions about that, we're happy to either answer them or try to explore them. But I also want to acknowledge that our teachers across the district are availing themselves of these opportunities, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, for professional learning, that she has provided options within our Flex program. There's a lot of interest in how this is going to impact not only writing, when you think of ChatGPT or research, but also just, the value of learning in and of itself, and voice. Right? Individual voice and collective voice, and what those mean in education now and in the future. So there's a great deal to come in this area, and we just wanted to make sure you were aware that we were, to the extent feasible, conscious of it and on top of it.
Comments or questions?
I appreciate the update because it is top of the conversation point, especially me being in marketing and things like that, where this is all going to go. So I'm glad we're thinking about it already.
We are. So I know our time is short and we are already at that 1 hour mark. So I'm going to efficiently just make sure that you're updated. We have completed our PSSA testing in the district. We met with some middle schoolers today to get some feedback on how it's going. They report being well prepared. They had some questions around science, which is okay because the science standards are changing anyway. So get ready. The science test is going to change also in the next couple of years. AP testing is well underway. Many of them were taken last week. We're finishing up this week. Keystone testing, as I know Dr. Scragan has left us, is very actively involved in getting ready for on the week of the 18th. And naturally, once that wraps up, we do our spring benchmark testing. And then as we have done now for the past few years, is we'll bring the results of all of those along with our spring benchmark performance to the Board of School Directors, along with our fall benchmark performance, next fall in October. So we're going to meet, I know we'll meet in September, but we'll also meet in October. And so we'll do that annual academic performance report for you all in October of next year. Questions on state testing? Dr. Yannicone, were you going to say something else? No? Okay. And finally, last but not least, our comprehensive plan, as you're well aware, got postponed from the Department of Education, and part of things like structured literacy and some other new requirements that were rolled out. And so they pushed back that due date. So it is due at the end of October. I will be actively working on that with our administrative team this summer. We already have some of that work completed, and then we'll bring it to all of you and review it with all of you on in September in order to put it on a board agenda in mid-September for approval in October. It needs a 30-day review period, so we'll talk about that right when we come back in the fall. Questions about that? I just didn't want to take any of you by surprise. Some of you may be aware of the concept of differentiated supervision. We are working with our principals and teachers to roll out a pilot of using differentiated supervision for our faculty, in which in a 3-year cycle, teachers who are tenured and have performed at the proficient or advanced levels in their work, distinguished or proficient in their work, can choose to skip a comprehensive observation and instead create a project speaking to their professional growth and learning. And so we're going to roll out a pilot for next year with an expected rollout, assuming once we've tinkered with the program after the first year for 24-25, which would allow our veteran teachers really to do some self-directed learning and inquiry instead of only relying on an observation from their administrator as a way to demonstrate their professional growth and learning. We wanted you to be aware of that. And not to be outdone, this summer, our ESY program is on its way. I met with Mrs. Schrage today to get the updated numbers. And when I first started working in the district, as you remember, in 2015, we had 25 students, maybe 30 who would participate in ESY. We are up to a whopping 75 students who will participate in our 3 tracks of ESY programming this summer. That program runs from June 26th to July 27th. And those are for special education eligible young people whose IEPs indicate they require summer intervention in order to maintain their skills from the time we close till the time we reopen. And so Mrs. Schrage and her team will be providing that service this year to 75 of our district students. That's really great. It's growing wonderfully. And I think we agree that that's really getting us some benefit in the fall. Questions on any of our summer projects? Any other questions about anything else? I want to make sure we provide an invitation for public comment, although as it looks at this point, we have no one from the public. So I'm assuming at this time, there is no public comment. Dr. Etlin, anything else?
No, it was a very, very detailed and comprehensive meeting. So for that, I thank you and all of the administrators and everyone who has supported all of the content presented this evening. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Etlin. And we're recommending that we meet on or around September 11th and next fall as our next academic affairs meeting. But more about that, you know, closer to September. Too soon to think about September right now. I appreciate it. I know that was a lot. I really appreciate the enthusiasm for these projects. I'm hopeful that they continue to instill confidence in the diligence in which we and the responsibility we take for this work to make sure that our students are performing to their best possible capabilities. And so I was happy that they could all, our teacher leadership team could be here with you tonight so that you can hear from them all the wonderful work they're doing. So I appreciate your engagement. I know that was a lot. Have a great rest of your evening and we will see you soon.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
everybody. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.